from the eternal that he ever gave to man, containing the knowledge of the past and the present and the future. Like looking upon a great glistening diamond, a great jewel that has so many sides, so many facets, of such a beautiful enormity that man has never ever in its entirety looked upon it with the consciousness of what it really contains. I have to confess that words fail me. And I pray that those who are to hear it will not flee from it because of what I say. I know that there's many of you out there that are listening to the sound of my voice. You may go so far, and don't be discouraged if you don't agree on some points with me, but just think of all of the fun and the excitement that you can have proving that I am wrong. Now we left off on our last tape, and we're wandering back and forth between verses 13 and 16, and I feel that right here in this first chapter, although it doesn't make it quite clear, it doesn't go into a detail, we'll get to that around verse 17 where it's speaking of John. I'm jumping ahead here, and he said, when I saw, I fell at his feet as dead, and he laid his hand upon me, saying to me, fear not, I am the first, I am the last, I am he that liveth and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and have the keys of hell and death. Now, I think it would be kind of important to know somebody with that kind of power and magnitude who has the power over death and could decide whether you are to live or to die, and when he was to restore you again, if he felt like it, and to what length of time. But you see, we're going to deal with some things here that I have decided to try to go into what is termed as mythology. Now, the Bible calls them parables. But you have to remember, if you go and look at these beautiful Greek statues, I'm telling you something, there was, what was it? There was way over 100 of these different Caesars. And some of them, Looney Tunes, would not be a fit description. I mean, these guys, some of them were fugitives from a laughing academy. They should have been put into those cougar jackets that zipped up the back and put in a rubber room so they wouldn't hurt themselves. And you know, when they talk about some clown like Nero playing the fiddle while Rome burned, now there's been a lot of conjecture on that too, but then these guys that held the power of life and death, and they held them up as gods, these some of these swine that fed the Christians to the lions, and they spent all of the time dreaming up new ways to entertain the people with these horrible atrocities, these cruelties, to where these coliseums, they had to actually have floors where they could just drain the hundreds of gallons of blood away from the dead and the dying. So don't you think maybe, just maybe, they had to take the Christian tales. They had to take the Bible and these ancient truths and hide them in what you call mythology. You think people are others? Listen, there's millions of people on this earth that are held captive by tyrannical governments. There's people here in this nation, both in the left and the right and the middle of the road, who are scared skinny of these people who have control over your lives. In Washington, D.C., you think your life isn't just temporal and your things are just temporal? They could be taken with you, away from you in the flick of an eye? So, please, when we go back and we examine these things, these writings and these historical things that come out, maybe we can just prove them in our Bible. They prove our Bible. Our Bible proves what they have to say, and we can find some answers. I'm not trying to convert you to any heathen religion. For God's sakes, I don't want to convert you to denominationalism. I can't convert anybody. You have to convert yourself. You have to accept or reject. Now, let us continue on. We left off on, they talked about the Lubad. They talk about these ancient shepherds that came from high and afar, and we know these ancients, they were very conversant with the solar system, and they knew more about it than many of the would-be astronomers today. And their other term, as we left off on the last tape, said the word bad, the olden, the foundation, the one where death is, as the same assumes the direct significance. Now, here's something, before we go into this, I want you to understand, I'm not going to take the time to get out of Strong's Concordance and do everybody's homework for him, but I would cite you back to when David sat upon the throne. He was the ruler. He talked about the moon and he talked about the stars. But he did not mention the sun, which is an ancient idiom, is allegorical, that he knew that at that time when he ruled over both the collective many tribes of Israel and also the scepter tribe of Judah, he knew that he was representative as the sun. Now keep this in mind also, in case you have not listened to our other series of tapes, Pilgrim ships. There's a lot of symbolism, a lot of allegories here when, well, let's go back to Daniel. Well, before we go to Daniel, another point I should make is that we find King, or Khan, as he was actually pronounced. Back through periods of history, he described himself as the sun god. He called himself, as we will get into Revelations here, then you will understand, he was the leopard god. He was the leopard king. I've actually brought back artifacts myself from Peru that showed the handles of this jar that I believe is in reality a replica of one that came out of a tomb of an ancient Peruvian king, and in that area there they had no knowledge of ever having had any leopards of this type that were used or symbolically as handles on this vase. But it seems like one of the ancient kings of Peru was proudly claiming descent from the great leopard king, or the great Khan, and as we pointed out, China is called the great land of Khan. So we have to keep a lot of these different things in mind, that sun was symbolic, and then we, in other series, we pointed out that as you go into the Babylonian and the Egyptian history and all, they talked about ancient periods where Venus, they said, and even the Indians of Central and South America talked about a time when it was in such close proximity to this planet that it was so close that it was even brighter than the sun. Now keep that in mind. This is going to tie in here, and we've read through Scripture that they are going to be destroyed by the brightness of His coming. And so I would also cite to you at this point when Daniel was told that what he had written in the 12th chapter was a closed book. It was not for his generation, but he made a prophecy of those which could be talking about you. I believe that there's you in the sound of my voice that are the very living instruments of this prophecy. It said, those who have brought many to righteousness. That means teaching them the law, getting them back to the laws of God to be obedient, to understand them, to teach others. It said, you, the ones who have brought many to righteousness, you shall shine with the brightness of the sun, some with the brightness of the moon, some the brightness of the stars. And it said, all glory is not of the same glory. And we will get to what these ancient terms, what did glory mean? We'll get back to that. But now there are appropriate epithets of the sun. It follows that by Lubad the Sumerians meant not mere wandering sheep, but sheep shepherds by the sun, the planets of our sun, talking about those that are in our solar system. And was not this what Christ was talking about here? And it says they believed that the location and the relation of the Lubad to each other and to the sun were described in many ancient Mesopotamian texts. And these reference to these planets that are above and those that are below. There was a writer, Kugler, Kugler, he correctly guessed that the reference point was Earth itself. But most of the planets that were spoken of in the framework of astronomical texts dealing with Mul, M-U-L, a term that kept the scholars guessing in the absence of a better solution. Now, most scholars have agreed that the term Mul stood for the Pleiades. What I believe that the Christ is speaking of right here, and he spoke of back in the Old Testament and through Job, and he said, if you can, tell me, what is this? Hey, you tell me all about Orion. I want you to tell me about the sweet Pleiades. Who can go there and who can come back? There is a mystery. I'm sorry, folks, it's in the book. Why didn't your preacher or teacher ever explain that to you? Because the Eternal says, I do nothing for naught. Now, as we know, the Pleiades, they're a cluster of stars in the zodiacal, or the constellation of Taurus. See, the bull. Remember, Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It represents 1. It represents 1,000. It can represent Taurus, the bull. And now the constellation of Taurus, and the one through which the axis of the spring equinox passed as viewed from Babylon back in circa 2220 BC. Now, in Mesopotamia, texts often indicated that the Mul included 7 Lamash, meaning 7 wonders that are familiar. And the scholars assumed that they were the brightest members of the Pleiades, which can be seen to the naked eye. The fact that depending on of classification, the group has either 6 or 9 such bright stars, and not 7, posed a problem, but it was brushed aside for lack of any better idea as to the meaning of Mul. Now, I believe it was probably pronounced Mu, M-U, like moo. Some of you may not have ever heard of it, but I've been quite intrigued in it, and I've collected all of the 5 books, and I've collected books that were written about the books that James Churchward first published in 1931 up to the ensuing years of, I guess into the 60s and whatever. But Churchward, if there's anything to it, he said back then that Rome and Babylon and Egypt and China, all of these one time great civilization, he said they were just merely the dying embers of a even more horrific civilization beyond the scope and imagination of present day people, of the marvels that pre-existed And everybody, just like Don Lee and all of those that wrote Lost Atlantis, and every 20 years they discover it. Now, they come out back in the 20s they come out with it, and again they've talked about it here off Florida, and they said Edgar Casey prophesied it'd be found in the Bimini's, just off here, very close to the Florida coast. But I believe Don Lee and some others pointed that out quite a number of years ago. But whenever we can't be sure of something and we can't think big enough, that we were talking about a civilization that probably constitutes several galaxies or several stars or possible universes, that's beyond the scope of our imagination. So we have them sink in the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. But getting back to this, Franz Kugler, he wrote Sternkunde und Sterndiensten in Babel. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, forgive me, folks. I'm not fluent in all of these languages. Now, he reluctantly accepted the Pleiades as a solution, for expressed his astonishment when he found that it stated unambiguously in Mesopotamian text that Mu Mu or Mu Mu or Mule Mule included not only wandering planets but also the sun and the moon, making it possible to retain the Pleiades idea. He also came upon texts that clearly stated that Mule Mule or Ul-Shu, UL-SHU 12, Mule Mule is a band of 12, of which 10 formed a distinct group. Now, let me digress, if you would allow me, for just 1 minute. Those of you who've heard my other tapes on the Pilgrim ship series, I brought out there that I believe that one of the most outside of Revelation, the next most mysterious secret book, that I made the misstatement in one lecture that the book of Jubilees, also Jubilees, and also I believe the book of Job was brought back to this planet from elsewhere, written down elsewhere, by none other than was brought back by the messenger Moses. And don't write to me for the documentation. I have to listen to those tapes. Did quite a bit of research onto it. And those of you that think that this sounds very squirrely, I would ask you to please get out your Strong's Concordance and you look up everywhere that the word Job is used, and you will find that there's all kinds of different names. It doesn't mean Job, but I believe it's one of the longest parables in Scripture. And Job stated that he had a wife, and he made an issue that he had 7 sons, and he had 3 daughters. That is 11. And with himself, that would constitute 12. Did he represent the eternal? Did he represent Eden? Did he represent the garden? Did he represent the household of all those trees that he owned? As I told you, one translation was a Yahuhalam. So, as the Egyptians talked about the evil people of Seth that came in the Shub ships, and we know Hallelujah, the ancient name of the eternal, the ever-living, and was it speaking of the Elohim of Yah who came in the Shub ships? But, okay, I know a lot of people, your eyes are rolling back in your head, and I'm about to lose you. But Job there talked about his sons and daughters who went to each other's houses. Yahshua said, the Savior, he said, in my Father's house there are many mansions. So was he talking about they were going among the stars. So we suggest that the term mule referred to the solar system, using the repetitive in capital letters mule to indicate the group as a whole as a celestial body, comprising all celestial bodies, let's see, there's another fellow by the name of Charles Verolud. He wrote La Astrologies Chaldea, or Chaldean as it means in English, translated a Mesopotamia text, a numbered K3558, that describes the members of the Mule, or the Kakaboo, group. The text last line is explicit. Excuse me. Kakaboo, the number of its celestial bodies is 12. The stations of the celestial bodies 12. The complete months of the moon is 12. Now the text leaves no date. The Mule, our solar system, was made up of 12 members. Perhaps this should not come as a surprise as we go to the Greek scholar Diodorus, explaining the three ways of the Chaldeans and the consequent listing of 36 celestial bodies, stated that these celestial gods, 12, hold chief authority to each other. The Chaldeans, they assigned a month and a sign of the zodiac. Now, Ernst Winder, in the German, it was, well, in English, let me put it into English, it was the Trekkies, the tracks, the cycles. Well, we'll just skip all that. But he reported, in addition to the way of Anu, A-N-U, and its 12 zodiacal constellations, some texts also refer to the way of the sun, which also made up of 12 celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and 10 others. Line 20 of the so-called T-tablet, T-E-tablet, stated, Naphar, N-A-P-H-A-R, 12 Shrimash, S-H-E-R-E-M-E-S-H, Hala, H-A-L-A, Shakakaba, Lu, Shasen, Unshamash. You see, that's kind of that's like a priest. Ina, Labai, Atigu, which means all in all, 12 members where the moon and the sun belong where the planets orbit. Now we can start to grasp the great significance of the number 12 and what it meant to the ancient world, and the great cycle or the circle of the Sumerian gods, and all of these so-called labeled as Olympian gods thereafter comprised 12 younger gods would join the circle only if the older gods retired. Likewise, a vacancy had to be filled to retain the divine number 12 in the principal celestial circle, and the way of its sun with its 12 members set the pattern according to which of these other celestial bands were divided into 12 segments, or were allotted 12 principal celestial bodies. Accordingly, there were 12 months in a year, 12 double hours in a day. Each division of Sumer was assigned 12 celestial bodies as a measure of good luck. Now, so much for that. I won't dwell on it anymore, and if I spent too much time on it, because it's pretty hard to try to satisfy everybody, because some like this and some don't like that, so I don't even worry about it no more. I just put it out here, and I said, here's some food for thought. You think about it, and if you don't like it, well, that's fine. But I had a friend of mine give me a book. I don't know if I even want to say the name of it, because unfortunately when I go quoting the book, people write to me about it. Hey, where can I get one of them? But for those of you who've heard of the a so-called Reverend Robert Taylor, he lived back in the beginning of the 1800s. He was from a very well-to-do family, a big iron baron, and he inherited money from an aunt outside of that. He had all that a man could hope for materially. He had a photographic memory. While even in grade school, he could sit down, read a book through, and memorize it and quote you every word for word. But a lot of times, you can have all the brains, you can be an educated idiot and not have common sense. But anyway, this young man went through school very quickly, and at a very early age he became a surgeon, a physician. And he operated on people at a very young age, and this last 4, 5 and a half years, something like that. Then he came upon a fellow who was, I forget what religious denomination, and he caught the ear of this brilliant young man, and this doctor's companion, this tailor. He said, "Oh my God," he says, "the curse of all mankind, he's learned religion." Now there's a difference between religion and the Bible and God. Well, anyway, the young man took to it like a duck did to water. He quit his doctrine, and he went on and became a spiritual doctor. Rose very high up in I believe in the Church of England. Oh, to high rank. He passed up all of his peers, and they couldn't promote him fast enough. He was world famous just about overnight. But then he started to question the Bible. And he did quite a tirade going off on Jonah and him being swallowed by a whale. Well, this could blow anybody away, and it wouldn't make sense to anybody who had common sense. This man was ahead of his time. He got all the questions, but he was in the wrong time for the answers, because he didn't have all the books and the computer system, and he didn't have the languages at his fingertips and the different concordances and so forth. And if I had lived in his time, I could not have answered him, because he put an open debate to anybody. Forgive me, folks. I've started chewing something here. I can't get it swallowed. But this man started to question things and started to ridicule the Bible. And because Jonah didn't stand up, because, see, at that time they had not yet rediscovered the fact that Nineveh was a large city, as it said, that it was actually a 60-mile quadrangle like Jonah had described it. So they doubted that, and they doubted that a whale could swallow him. And so nobody could answer his challenge on that, so he started attacking one thing or another. And then he turned around and he became a deist. Now, a lot of your dictionaries don't even say don't describe what that is, but a deist is somebody who believes in a God, and then he created the earth and he created man, dumped him off here, went on and said, "Hey kids, you're on your own. I'm not going to mess with you no more. I'm not going to mess in your affairs." And so the guy got kicked out of church, lost his fortune. But he went on and he started to ridicule, like, who was this Virgin Mary? And he said, well, what was her real name in real life, and so forth. And he answered a lot of his own questions, and he didn't realize what he was doing. He didn't go far enough. He went too far off track. But here's one of the things on page 58 of one of his books. He said Mary, of course, was not merely the Christian representation was merely the representation of the whole pagan concept of a goddess, a mother of heaven. Well, I don't know why he had to make her a pagan goddess, but if she was a child of God, which naturally she was, the Virgin Mary, the worldly mother of Christ, the lady who conceived our Savior, sure, I'd say she was a goddess. If God's her father and she's his daughter, that makes her a little goddess as far as I'm concerned. But he went on, he brought some things out, he answered himself and he couldn't understand. Or a heavenly mother speaks of, and he tried to equate her with one of these pagan goddesses of fertility and fruitfulness, and tie her in with the goddess of corn and wheat, which he went on to say, well, represented this other goddess, her blessedness. But is it possible that in these so-called pagan things and so forth, that they were talking about a virgin who was going to give birth to a child, And this holding the symbol of corn, why should that upset him so bad? Because how come Christ used that very vernacular when he said that, corn is planted and it dies, but out of it grows many ears of corn? He equated himself to the ear of corn that this woman held in her hand. And so he went on and he said, in pictorial representations of the sign of Virgo, the figure drew around the constellation, shows her extended, holding her hand an ear of corn. But why, asked Taylor, was her name Mary? All right, so we find her here in the constellation. Does not the Bible tell us that the heaven is God's handiwork? A lot of you folks have heard about the astronomy in the Bible and the different Taurus and Virgo, the Virgin, and Aquilus, the eagle, and a lot of people say, all right, you say all these signs are out there. How are we going to know where to start to read the Bible of heaven? How do we read these stars? And most people have never even heard of Bullinger and how he went into great lengths and he brought all this research and evidence forth, how every nation in the world, I don't care, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Chinese, the Egyptians, all of these ancient people knew of these signs, and they call them very much by the same thing. Okay, there was a little variation in some of the languages, but it all pointed pretty much to the same thing. And so here they talk about the pictorial representation here in the stars of Virgo. If he just went a little farther, Virgo's a virgin. And so a lot of people never stop to consider, and we all talk about the great, wondrous, the mightiest of all pyramids, the last and only remaining of the seven wonders of the world, the Pyramid of Giza, the very one that is on your dollar bill. And those folks that bring out the fact that it's mentioned in Isaiah, the 19th chapter, I think around 19 and 19 or 19 and 18, something like that. But then I have to confess that some scholars say that this was added later, so I'm not going to get into it, and I probably have a larger collection of books on just the Pyramid of Giza and all that pyramid stuff, starting back with Professor Smythe and all of those who wrote on it and spake about it, but I never wanted to make a religion about it. But I think the very interesting thing there is the Sphinx that's out in front of it. Nobody knows for sure who carved it, and as of late they have gone into the fact that it has it's much, much older than they ever figured before. This is the very one that Napoleon's army, when they captured Egypt, that they were using the Sphinx for cannon practice, and they blew the nose off of it. They disfigured the face of the Sphinx. And so a lot of them say that it's a male head on there, but it has the body of a lion, and it has the head of what I think is a woman. And so I've often wondered, is this not a possibility that when I look out there at the stars of heaven, and I see Virgo the Virgin, representative of Virgo the Virgin, a virgin woman is going to give birth to this man-child, not carrying the blood of sinful man. The blood is from the male. Oh, hey, and we're going to get into this just a minute about this blood and light and regeneration here. Not from another kook like me, but one of the greatest preachers and teachers probably that has ever existed in our century, even though you may not have heard of the man. But I look out there and I say, well, here's Virgo the Virgin, and here's Leo the Lion, and do I not start there on my time clock? And we go counterclockwise, and it seems all of these prophecies and things, they fall into a divine order and a pattern that you can follow that was prophesied not about individuals, but as nations and races and people, as they were manipulated and allowed to proceed as the Father willed it. Because we find that when a lot of these astronomers, both good and bad And remember, Herod had his own astronomers, and they went running to him, and they told him, "You're in big trouble, sir." They said, "Because the Messiah has been born." Well, how did you know that? Well, there's ancient records that tell, and all they have to do is go back to the sign of Aquilus the eagle, who moved into the head area of Virgo the virgin, and after periods of time dropped down into the womb area. And so they talk about all of these men of the East. Of the East. I will just say this. Venus is one of the so-called planets, sister planet to Earth. It's in the east, and it's called the Eastern Star. It's called the bright and the morning star. It's called the evening star. Another ancient name, just go look in some of your older dictionaries, it was called Lucifer, meaning a bright, shiny planet. And isn't it odd, while we're thinking about these constellations, as we progress through here, we get to Revelations 22:16, and this Yahshua, this Messiah, this Christ, he identifies with King David, who traced his genealogy back to Adam. He said, "I am the root and the offspring of David," and he said, "I am the bright and morning star." So is it talking about this God-man whose lineage comes from out amongst the stars? Or we dare talk about this or touch this. I'm not adding to it, and I'm not taking away from it, but I think that there's a glory and a magnificence that is just in this very first page of the what is called the book of Revelation, that I feel that we have ignored and we've overlooked. And well, if you want to get really, let's get crazy for just a minute. There was a book that was written called Light Years by a fellow by the name of Gary Kinder. It is a fabulous book. I don't know if it's still in print, but it's about a one-armed man over in Europe that has taken, all back in 1976, he took all kinds of pictures, the most awesome pictures that I have ever seen of UFOs, ships from space. What do we say, Elohim from the stars? Nobody's ever been able to prove that he's a fraud. And he said that he had even communicated with these people and said they were from the Pleiades. All right, so we get back here to, and we have told you how Cortez and these different other Spaniards, explorers that came in there and to Central and South America, and they talk about the gods who came from the space and rode upon the foam of the waves. Talking about the waves, the great ocean of space. And so we have, and he was all upset, and this would-be preacher, he said this really bothered him, this pictorial representation of the sign of Virgo. He said this was heathen. But it was written in the very stars of the heaven and talking about a woman that would bear a God-child that was to save his Israel. And he said Virgo, the figure drawn around this constellation, shows her extended arm holding near a corn. But why, asked Taylor, why was her name Mary? And why is she holding that corn? Well, you see how much was missing? Is this not some clues here that these Romans and so-called pagans, that they had access to other books, shall we call, of the New Testament and of the Old Testament? Did they have access to knowledge that we have been deprived of, that has been burned up and destroyed? Like the great schools of On and Vendetta and Heliopolis and those at the time of Alexandria and the Turks as they moved across Europe, and the great libraries of Alexandria where they literally burned hundreds of thousands of fantastic books and records. And do I have a lot of audacity because I bring this out and try to answer what this man went to the grave perplexed about. And he said, what does the name Mary mean? It is precisely the name Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron, who utterly signifies M-Y-R-R-H, meaning of the sea, or lady or mistress of the sea. So the sea. I told you the Indians of Central and South America, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the ancient Israelites. We take you back to Elijah, who sent Elisha over the hill, and the second time he come back, he said, I saw a small cloud likened to a man's hand. In the ancient idioms, he was talking about something in the hand, and God talks about his right hand. And what do you hold in your right hand? You hold a weapon. And he talked about his weapons of war. And he said, I saw a cloud likened to a man's hand, a fist, something that could fight. He said, I saw it come up out of the sea. So you see, he was talking about the sea of space. So here I say that it's the same as this, what they were talking about, and S-M-Y-R-N-A, the name of the sixth of the seven churches which are in Asia. They were addressed by Christ in Revelations, which said, I have demonstrated to be none other than the seven golden candlesticks, the seven constellations, the Ram. We know Jesus Christ in the book of Revelations, he was called the Lamb of God. He was the Ram of God, the firstborn, spotless male lamb. But that bothered him. Then he goes on, and he said, here, look else what these heathens are talking about. The bull. That's right, Taurus. It's mentioned in the Bible, and Bullinger brought it out, that all of the ancients knew that this represented, like when Christ said, I am the Aleph. He was talking about the bull. He was talking about Taurus. I am the first, I am the last, I am Taurus. And then he goes on, and he talks about the twin and the crab and the lion and the virgin and the ballast. In other words, the scales where a man is weighed, respectively, of March, April, May, June, July, and August, and September, in the midst of which the sun walketh in its annual course through the summer months, or reigns of the kingdom of heaven. Well, what is wrong with that? Why did that upset him? Because the Lord's Prayer said, have I not taught you how to pray? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven, as the kingdom of heaven. Now, it is, and then he goes on to say, it is none other than the very name of Myrrha, M-Y-R-R-H-A, the mother of the beautiful Adonis in the pagan mythology. The story of Myrrha in the 10th book of Ovid, introducing the character of the old woman Anna, the prophetess, he says, of Luke's character, or Luke's gospel, the mother of the virgin. Of the Catholic, the nurse of the virgin, the pagan mythology, aiding and abetting the allegory inset of by which the virgin of the zodiac is ultimately represented as the daughter, the wife, the mother of the Son. Now, as we told you, get your concordance out. All of the men of old, the great rulers like Moses, would be representative of the sun in our solar system. He was representative like the Eternal, got very vexed back in Exodus, and he told Moses, I'm sorry that I ever created Israel, and I think I'll just kill them all. And thank God for Moses, who had the audacity and the intestinal fortitude, who stood up to the Eternal and said, Father, you can't do that. He said, what? You tell me I can? I'm God. But see, his word, he keeps his word. It's impossible to lie. He said, Father, you gave them to me. I am responsible. If you're going to kill anybody, kill me and get somebody else can do it better job. He was a type, he was a shadow, he was an allegory of the Christ that was to come. He was not the Redeemer, but he was a prototype of a Messiah. So, you see, unfortunately, a lot of people do not want to believe it. They don't want to conceive that there was people outside of the Scotch, Irish, English, and German, and people of today who we erroneously are called a bunch of dumb Gentiles, that we know about this, and we don't want any other witnesses that come out of what we call the pagans or out of Rome, or any of those Christians that were sandwiched in amongst all of those heathen in that time, and the only way that they could preserve truth and pass it on to a future generation that might put aside their stupidity and their superstition and take off that halter that keeps them away from the granary. They've been tethered so close by their would-be shepherds. Let's take them off and reach out and see what we can find out. So we find he goes on to say the word Mary is, as everybody knows, the same as the Latin word mare, the sea. And in the plural form, Myra, M-A-R-I-A, pronounced Maria, signifies the sea as the objective Maria of or pertaining to the sea. Read without the letter N, after the ancient manner of writing, and the same word was of the days of infinity. I said before, from books that had long been lost. Now, we find here that, you see, unfortunately, where they said remote antiquity, one of the names of the goddess Venus. Well, later on, they probably had to hide it this way because those pagans that had taken over there in Rome, they made Venus, or the morning star, they changed the name as if you go back, get your concordance out in the Old Testament, the prophet of old there said that he looked for that holy city, the city of God, and it was not on this earth, because if it has been, he would have found it. But he said we referred to the house of the eternal as Bethel. But he said even in more ancient times, we're talking about times going back beyond Abraham, he said it was called Luz, which is short for Lucifer. He was talking about a bright, shiny planet, which also had some other ancient understanding with it that dealt with you and your rebirth, the resurrection. Let us continue on here. He talks about the Marina Venus, as she was called by the Romans, the Venus Enduomen. The Greeks, that is, Venus rising out of the sea, is talking about the sea of space. It was talking about the eternal Yahweh, God of the Hebrews, who said in your scripture, he made himself for a time a little lower than the angels, took upon him flesh, as did the children of God. And he came down and looked at the disciples. They walked with him all of those years. And he said to Peter, you've been with me all this time and you don't know who I am. He said, who dost thou say that I am? And he said, well, some think that you're Elijah. Some think that you're Lazarus. Some say you're a prophet. He said, well, wait a minute. I ask you the question. Who dost thou say that I am? And he came right out, and he said that he was God incarnate in essence. And he said, no man has told you this, Peter. You could not have known this except by the Holy Spirit. I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was referring in something beyond the understanding of what the churches say and their religious, superstitious sidetrackings of man that have been added to Scripture that's not there. And he was saying, you've got good instincts, you've got good genes, you've got the good DNA, and that's why you know and you're able to conceive and believe and understand and identify and know who that I am. In essence, he was saying not everybody's going to be able to do that. And so it's talking here, the ancient ones and their so-called mythology. They were telling the people that the Almighty, the God of gods, he was going to come from the sea of space. He was going to leave his very household that John here was speaking of, and John visited. And if you have the tenacity and the curiosity to stay with us and to keep an open mind. So, as the Greeks said, that is Venus rising out of the sea. They were talking about the sea of space, and that is precisely the character of this Miriam, the sister of Moses, and Aaron at the moment of their leading up to the children of Israel out of the Red Sea. And this victory was the Lord over Pharaoh, as expressly declared to have been achieved with a stretched out arm. That's right. The hand of the alternate, of the eternal Almighty. He said, I am your fortress and your high tower. David called him his shield, his buckler. He said that he would trust in him, that he was the protector. You see, if we, the silly, insipid, weak mortal men that we are, if we trusted in and relied upon and believed the eternal and walked the chalk and obeyed him, we would not be having the sweat of our brow going to pay for an army and navy and air force, a police force, CIA, FBI, and all this other nonsense. So let's go back. So this preacher back then that didn't understand these things, that became a deist, he couldn't understand what these ancients were saying about a stretched out arm from the eternal. And look ye here, sirs, by heaven, it is not here that here is not the stretched out arm, the peculiar characteristic of the Virgin of the Zodiac, the handmaiden of the Lord. The name Mary signifying the mistress of the sea. But you see, he didn't understand. You go back to Genesis. It talked about Eve, as we have shown you in the Hebrew in some rare instance. It was speaking of Kava, translated Eve, which meant a life container. This life container was somewhere in space. If you think all this is nonsense and superstition and silly, go back and look at the Old Testament. It tried to tell us all of these secrets that we have ignored through all these ages. So, distinctly, we have the characteristics of the Mary and Venus is rather identified by what he figured was a vulgar version of it. But I believe that we will skip all of that and we won't belabor it. Now, here I think we have some other clues of this guy who was so quick to ridicule. He went on in the Eleusinian Mysteries. He made fun of the word glory. Now, our Bible talks about glory all the way through, and it talks about the glory of God coming down. And he goes on, he says, glory is but a ridiculous, scenarious mouthing of its original clary, C-L-A-R-Y. The exact meaning of clary, now get this, is brightness. The attribute of brightness is a particularly characteristic of the sun. There we have a sun. And now, in case you're lost and you forgot where we were, we're back here in Revelation, first chapter, between the 13th verse and the 16th verse. And we're talking about he who stands here in the sea of space, this all-powerful, mighty, eternal God that I know people listening to these tapes, I'm going to get some nasty letters. They're really going to get mad at me because I try to deify him and glorify him and show how much more powerful and how great he really is, and of his greatness and power and the understand of it. I try to pass along and share with people. It will go against maybe their theological beliefs, but I don't care, because I've had to change a lot of my own as I progress along in understanding. So he goes on here, the attribute of brightness is a particular characteristic of the sun. use only the meaning of the word instead of its unmeaning sound, where it reoccurs. And the helioatrios sense and the origination of our Christian communion service and its absolute identity. He said he goes on with the pagan mysteries and so forth. But he goes back and he quotes from the Greeks here and so forth. And now keep this in mind, as later on we're going to get into Revelations. The 12th chapter talks about there was, that's plural, that's past, and we don't know particularly at what time frame, where he said there was a war in the heavens. And so here's what he compares, and my goodness, the man was just a wealth of information, and he was using all of the old Greek mysteries and so forth, that they did nothing to hurt our Christianity, but what they did was help glorify and help confirm it and bring out a lot of things that we have in the Christian faith that I don't think that we ever understood. And so this is why I seem to go awry, and I wonder so far with this world full of deists and full of atheists and agnostics and believers, unbelievers, and make-believers and confused people, and lost every day. I have people writing to me or call me on the phone, and they want me to sum it all up in a 15 or an hour conversation and make it all straight for them. It doesn't work that way. But he goes on. He gives 2 rows here as a list. He said in pagan mythology, Titan, the eldest of the children of heaven, yielded to Saturn, the kingdom of the world, provided he raised no more children, but the birth of Jupiter. But on the birth of Jupiter he rebelled, raising war in heaven, and he prevailed not, neither was his place found any more in heaven. And he and all of his host of rebel angels were cast out and imprisoned under mountains heaped upon them. Their vain attempt to raise is the supposed cause of earthquakes and volcanoes. Or from our sacred hill with fury thrown, deep in the dark, Tartarian gulfs still groan. Jupiter's threat to the inferior gods, Iliad 6, the Pope's version, he calls it. Let's stop right there. Now, I believe that a lot of this ancient mythology with these translators have accidentally and on purpose, they have distorted it. They've added to, they've taken away, trying to sell it to their generation. But Titans, it talks about the great Titans of space that we've read about these things, but you remember, you go back to the allegorical idiom and great parable, one of the great enigmas in the Bible that I have more friends that fight over Adam and Eve and who Cain was and who Abel was, and Adam was a person and Eve was just a person, and Cain was a person and Abel was a person, and I tell them, well, when Cain and Abel met on the field, like in the old knights of old when they met on the field of battle, it was talking about 2 great titans, 2 great nations that were fighting. It's talking about a great war in heaven, like Christ said in the 12th chapter of Revelations as we get to it. And as you go back in the book of Job, where one of his servants came to him and talked about the house of one of his sons was totally wiped out, that fire came down from heaven and destroyed him and his house and his children and possessions and etc. Man, and it talked about how they sat in the dust and they had these boils. Nobody ever thought of radiation poisoning. Nobody has thought until this generation could they understand atomic or hydrogen warfare beyond the scope of man's imagination or what he would ever want to imagine. I believe that this was the original opening of this parable called Pandora's box. They opened a box that they could not stop. Now, okay, and doesn't that sound like our scriptures? He rebelled, raising war in heaven, and he prevailed not. Doesn't that sound like, O thou son of the morn? Period. O Lucifer means a bright and shiny star. And how art thou fallen from heaven? How art thou come down to the earth, O son of the morn? In other words, thou citizen, thou son of the morn, of this bright and shiny star, that you were cast out of heaven. And he said he was going to go back up, and he was going to rise above the throne of the Almighty. And so let's go over for a minute as he compares this thing where he's talking about these angels. And I believe here when it talks about they were imprisoned under mountains. Now, mountains in the old Hebrew, as it's mistakenly used sometimes, it means a place high up. And all you have to do, as I've already done, those of you that have not heard our Pilgrim ship series, we looked up the word mountains, and we looked up the word mount. And a lot of these people who sing the old Pentecostal songs in church, we will mount up as on eagle's wings. The Bible literally tells about a type of extraterrestrial ship called mount ship. And you remember any of those who have read the books of Enoch. It talked about the 200 fallen extraterrestrial messengers that were called angels by the Greeks. They come down, some say on, but they came down in Mount Hermon. All right, let's go over here to his comparison. Satan, the eldest. Now this is his erroneous hogwash. This is what he reads into Christendom. No wonder the guy became a deist. Satan, the eldest of the children of heaven, yielded to Jehovah the kingdom of the world, provided he raised no more children, but on the birth of the Messiah he rebelled, and raising war in heaven prevailed not, neither was his place found any more in heaven. And they quote you this from Revelation 13 and 8. But if you go check that out, you see he's done an awfully lot of adding to. And he talks about the angels which kept not their first estate. He's quoting to you from Jude. And then it goes on, he said, and God spared not the angels of sin, but cast them down to hell. Well, do you find in the ancient language it was called Tartarus here on earth. It's talking about this world. In fact, he quotes here 2 Peter 2 and 4. Note well, he said the original word signals, or signifies Tartarus. And then he talks about Eve was driven out of paradise, and her representative of Mary, knowing that she was not a man, but brought forth her son, our Lord Jesus. Well, this guy talk about, no wonder he gets Christians lost with these sorry bunch of would-be preachers and teachers. And but I fear that a lot of this I take you too far awry. But let's go back. Let's examine the word Saturn for a minute. It's from the word Saturnius, probably the root of Siri Saturn, too slow. From the dictionary says from the Roman religion, an ancient god. Now listen to this, of the seed sowing. Later identified with the Greeks, Corneus, and like him, fabled to have been king during an ancient golden age. Well, Atlantis and Mu, they talked about of an ancient glorious golden age. As I read the book by George Smith, written about 120 years ago, of the Chaldean account, it speaks of an ancient golden era when the so-called floods that people have interpreted as happening here on earth. They talk about great wars in space, and they allude to places never found on this earth. Now then they have Astron, the planet next in magnitude to Jupiter, next more remote from the sun. It is remarkable for in its engirding rings, we're still talking about Saturn, which are composed of a swarm of small solid bodies, and etc. Well, then we go back, and for those of you, I will do just a little bit well, let's go back here for just a moment. I want to compare something here. We've alluded to you and said that between 3 and 16 of the first chapter of Revelations here, that it's quite plain. I don't think anybody with any intelligence could say it is not talking about the Pleiades. And I think that our brother John was taken to other worlds. He was taken to heaven. He said he went to the throne of God, and I believe here that he even went to the trip to the Pleiades. Now, in the Greek, see, they hid it. And don't keep this in mind. Remember, Job said he had 7 daughters, he had 3 sons, and he had a wife and himself. That made 12. We went through that. Now, the Pleiades, they were the daughters of Atlas, 7 in number. Their names were Electra, Maya, Tayget, I believe it was, if I'm saying it right. I believe it was spelled Taygete, Alcyone, Alcyone, forgive my bad pronunciation, but the other one was Merope, Seleno, Sterope, and Orion pursued them, but they fled before him, and he could never seize all of them, as the story goes, and still he seemed to follow them till Zeus pitying them. Now remember this, Zeus was the god of war, and Zeus was depicted mysteriously here with Mars, the red planet, like the communists called themselves the Reds. Just like in the Old Testament, is it coincidence? Esau have I hated and Jacob have I loved. And Esau, he took great Canaanite wives, daughters of the great Khan, and his name was changed to Edom, meaning red. Is this all just coincidence? So here we have Zeus, he pitied them, he placed them in the heavens of stars. And it said that even Orion continued his pursuit. But so, you see, the Scripture, the Old Testament, it talks about Orion, and it talks about the Pleiades. But anyway, Orion here, he was unsuccessful in his pursuit, yet he was persistent. While he lived on earth, one of them, Maya, was the mother of Hermes. Another, Electra, was the daughter of Dardanius, the founder of the Trojan race. Although, see, Trojan is very close to like what they're saying about these Titans. As the primitives would say, they would refer to the Elohim, they would say these were the great gods from the stars that came from the heavens. And although it is agreed that there was 7 of them here, there are only 6 stars which are actually visible. And the 7th is invisible except to those who they claim have very good eyesight. Now, you say, well, that's all fine and good. It sounds pretty far out. But I would like to take the liberty to quote you just in part from a letter that I received from a lady in Wisconsin. I found it quite awesome, quite inspiring. I was super impressed. Let's see. I'll start here with just part of it, and I will not give her name because she may not appreciate that, but I have it on file if anybody doubts any of it. It goes on, from an astronomical point of view, the Pleiades are a rather young, extremely insignificant system of stars. Yet, at different parts of the globe, many times simultaneously, many times 1,000 years apart, history and mythology mention the Pleiades and their importance. They are noted as being the source of knowledge in the rich cultures of Asia and the potato culture in Europe and South America. These societies attribute their knowledge to a series of events in mythology from mythological form involving messengers. See, instead of angels, there's this old Hebrew word, messengers from the Pleiades. They are revered, and they've looked at the center of the universe as a source of ancestry and wisdom and guidance. Though other stars and star groups are mentioned in history, the frequency of reference to the Pleiades seems to exceed all others. She goes on to say, a type culture of several thousand stars, the Pleiades lie in the constellation, now listen carefully, of Tartarius the bull. Remember Aleph in the Hebrew, 1,000, also means the bull. She goes on to say, in the constellation of Tartarius the bull, nearly 500 light years from Earth, the principal stars shine in bluish white and radiate intensely, illuminating, shouldering clouds of gas. Now keep that in mind, the clouds of gas. I want to show you something a little later on here. And it's going to be dealing with you and have a connection, I believe, to the resurrection. The star cluster seems to be enshrouded in a gossamer haze, and one that inspired Tennyson to describe them as looking like a swarm of fireflies tangled in a silver braid. In star lore of all ages, now here's a book that this William Alcott wrote. No group of stars known to astronomy has excited more universal attention than a little cluster of faint stars as we know as the Pleiades. In all ages of the world's history, they have been admired and critically observed. Great temples have been reared in their honor. Mighty nations have worshipped them, and the people far removed from each other have been guided in their agricultural, commercial affairs by the rising and the setting of these 7 close-set stars. 6 are visible, 1 is hidden. The little group tinkling so timidly in the night of autumn in the eastern heavens links the race of mankind in closer relationship than any bond save nature. No wonder they have inspired universal awe and admiration that within this group of suns, men have sought to find the very center of the universe. Now, listen, see, I'm not the only coot. I spent quite some time there and I spoke of it. Those of you who heard other series, lectures. And now she goes on to say, legends from pre-Inca people living in Peru speak of inhabited stars and gods who visited them from the Pleiades. The astronomical writings of China, prefaced in UFOs and Ancient Civilizations. That's a book, in UFOs and Ancient Civilizations by Caroline Hatt, H-A-T-T. Mention the Pleiades as early as 2357 BC. Worshipped by young women as the 7 stars of industry. The Greeks on the first day of spring, the south passageway of the Great Pyramid. See, the Pyramid of Giza. She didn't put that in. I'm adding that. Perfectly framed the Pleiades. Some scholars have maintained that the 7 visible stars, May Day and the Japanese Feast of Lanterns, you've heard me speak of that, are star clusters to Chu-Ho-Kun, home of our ancestors, they say. Remember, what is China called? The land of Kun. Now, remember what we said about the Indians of Peru and past tapes? They talked about Quetzalcoatl, meaning the feathered serpent. It also, is implying something that flies. It was talking about the dragon ships, just like the Chinese refer to them as the great dragon ships called the yin, not yin and yang, but the yin and yang ships. And we've covered those Chinese poems. Now, we told you about the Indians who told Cortez and the rest of them. He said there was one here even before him. It was called Cuckoo Khan. So here in this the Feast of Lanterns and so forth, when they talk about Choho Khan, now the Hopi call the star cluster Choho Khan, home of our ancestors. And Navajo legend holds that men arrived on Earth from the stars, particularly the Pleiades, and that we continue to be visited by celestial relatives. I know this lady right here. I sent her some tapes, and we went into the dog star and how the black tribes of Africa, very close, so you know where we're talking about, darkest Africa, near what would be called Timbuktu today. This is where these doggone people are. And over in Vietnam, they talked about the Dog U people. They have statues and carvings and remembrance of them that go back thousands of years ago. They found carvings of doggone that was symbolized by a costume, half man and half fish, of the gods that came from there, and the doggone people, the blacks of Africa. They've known about astronomical things and tradition that's beyond, well, it took the white man to rediscover it here just in this century, in this last century. But they got mad when I tried to tell them that the black people knew something that dumb white boys didn't know. They got all upset about that. And then if I go telling people about the Japanese and the Hopi Indians and all these people that kept their tradition alive, but the white man, he gets scared skinny every time someone says, oh, you're looking for your roots, you're looking for your identity. Why, you must be a fascist. You must be a neo-Nazi. Are you a Klansman? Are you a hate monger? My wife, a while back, mailed out some literature to some of these local limp-wristed, wimpy preachers, and one of them didn't like it, and he called up and he said, say, listen, are you a Klansman? I didn't bother to answer his stupid question. I just hung up on the jerk. But anyway, and so the Navajo legends, they tell that men arrived here on the earth from the stars, particularly the Pleiades. So you see, these ancient people talk about people that have come from Venus, people that have gone back there, people that come from the Pleiades. How did these ancient people know all of this stuff, this science, this knowledge? It's just something they sat around smoking peyote buttons and dreamed up? Oh, I don't believe so, folks. Then there was another lady here, Angie Clark, in the System of the Stars, wrote in 1907, called the Pleiades, the meeting place in the skies of mythology and science. The vivid and picturesque aspect of these stars riveted from the earliest ages the attentions of mankind, a peculiar sacredness attached to them, and their concern with human destinies is believed to be intimate and direct. And if these preachers or people don't believe this, I said, get your concordance out, look all this up, write back and tell me what God is talking about. And when he talked in Job in ancient times, he said, can you explain this to me, boy? Tell me all about Orion and tell me about Pleiades and all of these things. This is written down and attested to get the dumb white boys to thinking. Maybe they could come up with something besides fighting and killing each other. Now, in Colonel Waddell Stevens' book, which I've not read this one either, UFO Contact from the Pleiades, Volume 1, mentions the Pleiades as being members of an intergalactic federation of planetary assemblies. Hey, you see? Hey, this, I don't know when this was written, but see, there's some other kooks around besides me. When I said that Genesis tried to tell us Eden is the headquarters of an intergalactic federation and the trees were simply representing planets. Now this lady goes on and she says in Revelations 1:20 and Revelations 2:1, it states in the words of Christ, the sacred mystery of the 7 stars that thou sawest in my right hand, and the 7 lamps of gold, and the 7 assemblies. Revelations 2:1, these things saith he that holdeth the 7 stars in his right hand, and he that walketh in the midst of the 7 lamps of gold. It sounds to me like Christ was a messenger from the Pleiades. I'm quoting her. Now, you will find that I went back and, well, so far I haven't got any letters made anybody mad. But I said Christ never walked on the water. I quoted to him, I think, from the 9th chapter of Job, where, let's see, what is that? Job 9:8 says that it talks about the Almighty walks on the waves. Talk about walking on the vibrations of energies, walking in space. He's walking in the ocean of space. It's something bigger than just like some guru down here on the earth that's got some sort of magic power where he can walk across the pond. Big deal. And then they go back, and our New Testament has been so used and abused by the translators and going through so many languages, if they'd take the time to bother to look it up in their concordance and do a little reasoning on their own. If not, get my tapes. I spent a lot of time on it. Did your homework. Where it talks about he walked on the water, it meant he did fly. He flew in something. Very simple. There's a lot of things there. If you go back and take a second look at it, it's a mind blower. But, you know, I don't know why people get mad. I think the audacity that people get all bent out of shape is to think that this God is dumb as they are, or dumber. In other words, he hasn't caught up with us in the 21st century. He's got 747s and all these big funny-looking planes that can fly to France in an hour and a half or two and dump billions of gallons and years all over this universe. That's not intelligent. But he's got some ships that can go out to Orion and go to Pleiades and back, and gosh, he didn't get our permission to make other people and to populate other planets, and he was just shucking and jiving you when he said in the Father's house there are many houses. That means places and planets. A house is like the Pleiades and like Orion. He said, I go now to prepare a place for you also. My friends, if you could only catch a grasp of what I'm talking about. He's trying to prepare some people here that can rule not only over a state, a county, but a galaxy. We don't know what we will be like, but we will know that we will be like him even as he is, that he will be King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and there's a great possibility that someday that you can rule 20 planets or 100, because he's talking about millions and billions and trillions. He's talking about a universe and space that is ever expanding. How do you think you got here? Through your progenitors that came from great probing ships from deep space. And this at one time was the outreach. It was the frontier of a new, like, go west, young man. That's what it was, to the star seed. I don't care if you can't believe it. You know what the Bible tells me? There's bodies celestial and bodies terrestrial. And as you have borne the image of the earthly, you will again bear image of the heavenly. There's people here that are just terra firma stock. They were born here, as they say, and they're going to die. Rat cheer. But don't worry about it. Hey, if this calling's not for you, try to find somebody who can help them out with it. But she goes on. She says, I'm listening to the UFOs at the Resurrection, Part 2. She's talking about one of my tapes that is in a series. And she says, you just prefaced Robert K. Temple's A Serious Mystery. Wasn't that a marvelous subject or a study? It's a shame that some of my associates I shared that material with couldn't believe the black culture being so advanced. I have no trouble with it. Most of us have been too molded and one-idea to accept anything new. Now, she's quoting another book here in the 7 Tablets of Creation by, let's see, who'd you say here? L.W. King. The ancestors believed that the red companion of Sirius, Digitaria, was controlled by Horus discs. Now, those of you who've got my other tapes, you heard about, told you what the Egyptians said about Horus that went in the flying disc, the flying shield, had the eye in the sky. He was talking about a satellite. But she says controlled by Horus disc, which is known as the disc of life. Sirius appears on Hatshepsut's, that was one of the ancient pharaohs there, architecture, and Senmut's ceiling tomb, where Orion appears west of Sirius instead of east. Something affected and changed the constellation of Orion afterwards. The Nile acted irrationally as it does today. A civilization as Egypt should never have maintained its remarkable stability without such a river. The disc in the right hands made the difference. But then, too, it became a reason to wage war over control of it, and all of this thought provoking. Let's see, where did, well, anyway, there was one other little story in closing. She said, we look forward to sharing more information with you and wonder if you have, in your extensive research, ever read The Greatest Story Ever Told by Dr. Lana C. Cantrill. She is a biohistorian, etc. Okay, I covered everything I wanted to share with you there. If I haven't got you all emotional and been out of shape, and I'm not preaching any of this as gospel, but I think that maybe, and I'm hoping if nothing else, this should upset some people to the point that they should stop and think a little bit. Now, a lot of people, thinking people who read the Bible, still read Velikovsky. Well, let me quote to you here. Let's go back, and when they speak of the destruction of Troy, by the Greeks is both described by Homer and attributed to the conflicts that went on between all these contesting celestial deities who were in conflict. You remember some of the contestants were Zeus, Jupiter, Ares, Mars, and Phalus, Athene, and Venus to a lesser extent, Aphrodite, the moon, and Hera was Earth, or represented her. Now, Greek tradition further attributes the founding of Troy here to Dardanius, whose mother was Electra, one of the 7 celestial daughters, all daughters of Atlas. We went through this just a minute ago, a part of it. And then we talked about Troy was destroyed. And I do not believe that all of this was here on earth. Now, there may have been some cities and places here named after ancient celestial events and warfare, but Greek mythology has it that Electra could not bear to watch, so she withdrew from the heavens never to return. Now, we go and we find out that Sitchin, I think it was in his book, The 12th Planet, he talked about Electra and so forth, and then he speaks of, Marduk, left this solar system ever so many hundred years, would go out in kind of an egg-shaped pattern, then yet come and cross our paths. But there's a lot here that I don't understand, we don't understand, we may not understand till the Almighty returns, but Velikovsky, he wrote a lot of data and valuable interest on this subject, in part, like read the Second Worlds in Collision, pages 207 and 375. You find it's very interesting, and note that in the same century, you have the Hebrew fires, and brimstone prophets also discuss cosmology and impending judgments, and periodically in sequence among them there was Joel and Amos, who called the nations to repent for 3 years before the great earthquake or earth shaking. Others that followed were Micah and Isaiah. They were monthly, you might say, prognosticators. He called them a watchman in the night, and Isaiah's cosmology is described in chapters 24 to 37, also 2 Kings 19 and 20 is particular interest, at a time where it speaks of a blast from heaven that was associated with the reversing of the sundial and the breaking of the walls of Jerusalem that they claim were some 40 foot thick and 100 feet high by earthquakes. And Habakkuk in the 3rd chapter there, and among other portions of the minor prophet, is remarkably descriptive. And you might find it of great interest to note that the destruction of both Troy and the Assyrian armies of Sennacherib are attributed to extraterrestrial interference there in Isaiah. He was the prophet of crises for the Hebrews, just as Homer was the bard to the Greeks. But I believe that Homer was a plagiarist. He was a bard. That meant he sang. And I believe that he sang the old songs of David and them. But then, some of you heard the other one we talked about as they dug up ancient Nineveh there. They found tablets in the ruins there of the King Ashurbanipal's great clay tablets that describe that one of the ancient kings, Etan, he took a voyage to the sky with these great, beautiful, blonde men that came down in a ship in the form of a shield, and it landed in a great vortex of fire in the royal palace's courtyard there. And these blonde men stepped out, and they took him, and they left this earth, and they went to the moon and Venus and Mars, and they were gone a couple of weeks and come back. And this was verified in a book, Asher and Babylon by H. Smokel. And he translated it, and it was literally written in stone, and it cannot be denied. So what is all of this? Does this not confirm that Christ might have known what he was talking about when he said there was a great war in the heavens? And maybe this is what he meant when we are told that we are strangers and pilgrims in the earth. He said, be not of this world, be not of this world order, but continue to pray and to guide your fellow man, that we will stand for the kingdom and the guidance and the direction of our soon to return